Chapter 1: The Weight of Dreams. Aubrey Rose sat at her easel in the corner of her small studio loft apartment on Bourbon Street in the French Quarter of New Orleans. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow across the room. Sunlight poured through the tall, industrial-style windows, and bathed the space in soft light as it touched the polished wood floors and climbed the exposed brick walls. Above her, wooden beams stretched across a high ceiling, where strings of fairy lights hung loosely, their delicate glow mingling with the fading day. The apartment was old and run down, but at $1,000 per month, it was affordable, and the landlord allowed them to make any alterations they liked. Outside, the street hummed with life. She could hear the low, rolling clatter of a streetcar, the distant notes of a saxophone drifting from a nearby corner, and the occasional laughter of people passing below. From her window she could just make out the graceful iron curves of the Crescent City connection that crossed the Mississippi River. A familiar landmark that always seemed to remind her both how far she'd come and how far she still wanted to go. Inside, her little haven overflowed with life. Potted ferns and trailing ivy filled every shelf and corner, their leaves spilling over in a tangle of green. A faint, earthy scent hung in the air, the smell of damp soil and fresh growth, mixed with the occasional sweet hint of jasmine from a window box she tended carefully. The apartment had a quiet charm, a blend of old New Orleans character. And the open, urban feel of a New York loft, a space that felt both grounding and inspiring, if sometimes a little lonely. The sunlight, almost theatrical, illuminated the edges of the blank canvas set up before her, as if daring her to break its stillness. She gazed at it, feeling the heavy swirl of 1,000 ideas inside her, none clear enough to reach the surface. This struggle was all too familiar, the aching, restless battle to pull something real and meaningful from the chaos inside her mind. Her fingers twitched the familiar itch to paint, gnawing at her, yet a dull, persistent throb in her stomach pulled her back to a more pressing reality, the looming bills, overdue rent, and the relentless crushing pressure of financial survival. She had always been a dreamer, a hopeless romantic of sorts, clinging to the belief that art was the truest expression of the soul. But recently, the suffocating grip of financial strain made it increasingly difficult to maintain that idealistic stance. She ran a hand through her long, light brown hair. She had only dyed it once, a daring purple phase back in high school, but at 26, she'd mostly returned to her natural locks. Well, almost natural. She still relied on keratin treatments to keep her fine, naturally curly hair straight and smooth, something she'd long preferred despite people always telling her how beautiful her curls were. But truthfully, her curls were just one of many things she hadn't quite learned to embrace about herself. With the fresh keratin treatment, she could enjoy the next 3 months of waking up without the dreaded task of detangling the wild, frizzy nests that usually sat atop her head, and that small simplicity brought her a certain peace. She loved how low maintenance it made her mornings, but she hated how Memphis, her boyfriend of 3 years, often made her feel guilty, as if the $180 she spent on the treatment every 3 months was the root of their financial struggles and the reason they were always falling behind. Her blue-gray eyes held a mix of determination and quiet exhaustion as they wandered back to the empty canvas waiting before her. At just under 5'8", she always sat a little taller than the easel, often needing to fiddle with the rickety old chair to get the height just right. The chair had been with her for years, its worn cushion flattened and its adjustment lever sticky from age. Sometimes, it barely registered her slender 115-pound frame, and she'd have to bounce on it a few times, laughing to herself as she tried to apply enough force to make the seat drop lower. It was a small but familiar ritual, one of the many odd little things that filled her days and made the apartment feel like her own private world. As she finally settled into place, her olive-toned skin caught a hint of the golden afternoon light, glowing in the reflection of the tall loft windows. That sun-kissed complexion always reminded her of where she came from, a blend of her mother Danielle, an Irish-American woman with delicate features and a bright, playful energy, and her father James, a proud brown Maori man from New Zealand whose strong hands had built a semi-successful construction company when they settled here in New Orleans. Her parents had met years ago in San Francisco, shared a chapter of life across the ocean, and eventually laid roots in the city, and raised Aubrey and her younger sister, Celine. Her eyes drifted to Memphis, sprawled lazily across their shared bed, one arm flung over a tangle of camera straps and scattered lenses. The soft light from the window caught the tousled waves of his shaggy brown hair, the strands fell haphazardly over his forehead. His hazel eyes were half-closed, flickering now and then with a trace of his usual charm, though lately, exhaustion seemed to linger just beneath. Aubrey's gaze traced the familiar lines of his body, the lean strength stretched across the mattress, the dark ink curling up his arms and chest, the fierce dragon winding along his calf, the collection of tiny symbols etched into his skin like a map of a life lived boldly. And then, as always, her eyes came to rest on his face, still untouched by tattoos, except for the delicate wanderlust ink just above his left eye and the tiny cross beneath his right. Small, subtle marks, but ones that always seemed to hint at something restless inside him, something that never quite settled, no matter how still he lay. Work had always been slow for Memphis, his freelance photography gigs were always just enough to keep them afloat, but since the lockdowns a few years back, it had become even slower. Even in 2025, they were still feeling the ripple effects, the financial pressure pressing in at the edges of their lives like a weight that never fully lifted. She watched him for a moment, feeling a familiar tug of both affection and weariness. Most days, it felt like they were walking a tightrope, every step a careful calculation to keep from slipping into disaster. And lately, the strain of it all had begun pressing harder on Aubrey's shoulders, her fatigue growing deeper by the day. She sighed, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and wondered, not for the first time, how long they could keep balancing like this, chasing dreams while trying to outrun the gravity of their reality. They had been together for 3 years, ever since a chance meeting in a bar. Aubrey could still remember the first time she laid eyes on Memphis, the instant pull of attraction that left her wondering now whether it had been love at first sight or simply lust. She wasn't entirely sure. But over the years they'd spent together, one thing had become clear: Memphis was a man overflowing with potential, armed with an undeniable gift for photography. Yet, his easygoing nature often clashed with the harsh realities of life. His struggle with dyslexia had steered him away from traditional education, guiding him instead toward photography, a path made possible by his father's connections and a generous equipment loan, advantages Aubrey's own parents could never have afforded. Despite everything, her faith in Memphis remained unshaken, though her patience wore thin as he drifted from one gig to the next, never seizing the more lucrative opportunities that could elevate their precarious situation. In contrast, she had ground through countless mundane jobs to appease Memphis and her parents. Even earning a business degree in New York among peers who had forsaken their passions for pragmatism only to end up just as disillusioned and unfulfilled as she felt now. Painting had reignited a spark within her, a beacon of true vitality. Now, under the crushing weight of their circumstances, that spark flickered dangerously, and was threatening to become extinguished. Compelled by a surge of restlessness, Aubrey set her brush down and rose to her feet, her gaze landing on the daunting pile of bills stacked by the door. Rent was due in just 2 days, with the electric bill hot on its heels. A knot tightened in her chest at the thought. She walked over to their bed, just a foot or two away from her spot by the window where she liked to paint in their apartment. As she stood there for a moment, she hesitated and debated whether to wake Memphis. Finally, she made up her mind, and quietly crossed the last few steps and nudged him awake. His hair fanned out messily on the pillow, and formed a chaotic halo around his peaceful, sleeping face. "Memphis," she whispered, as she perched on the edge of the bed, "how are we going to pay the rent this month?" Memphis groaned, and the remnants of sleep faded as he rubbed his eyes. His smile, sleepy and sweet, quickly soured. "I don't know," he muttered, his voice thick with fatigue. "I've got a gig lined up. I think." She bit back her frustration, knowing all too well the familiar script that followed. "You're not in the right headspace to create right now," Memphis remarked, a hint of concern lacing his voice. "Why don't you consider that part-time job Jackie offered?" Jackie Green, Memphis's sister-in-law, was a successful graphic designer who never hesitated to tout her professional importance. She had dangled a starting position before her, confident her own clout would secure the placement at the media company she worked for. The very thought made Aubrey bristle. Jacque epitomized the safe, conventional path that stifled genuine creativity, a path Aubrey vehemently rejected. "I'm not going to settle for some office job," she retorted sharply, her words dripping with bitter resolve. "I'm not selling out. I refuse to live my life playing it safe just to scrape by." Memphis sighed, as his fingers absent-mindedly tapped on his phone. Aubrey's heart sank a little deeper with each hollow tap. She loved him dearly, but his detachment, especially in moments like these, felt like a heavy anchor dragging her down. How could she possibly draw inspiration from life when her own existence felt so uninspired? She stood up and swallowed the lump of bitterness in her throat. "I'll figure something out. I just need to focus," she said, her voice wavering despite her attempt at conviction. As Memphis's phone buzzed with a new message, his expression shifted to one of cautious optimism. "This might be something. I've possibly landed a big gig that could cover our bills," he said, a flicker of hope crossing his weary features. "I'll fill you in later." Aubrey didn't press further. For now, surviving the day was victory enough. The subsequent weeks flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Memphis, invigorated by necessity, threw himself into his work with unprecedented vigor. His determination paid off, and he secured enough photography gigs to not only cover their overdue rent but also manage the looming electric bill. As she watched him hustle, Aubrey couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. He was finally tapping into the potential she had always seen in him. His days began before dawn and stretched into late evenings, the heavy camera gear a near-permanent fixture over his shoulder as he left their apartment each morning. Then, one lively Saturday, Memphis came bursting through the door, radiating an infectious energy that instantly filled the small space of their home. His face was alight with excitement, reminiscent of a lottery winner, a stark contrast to the exhaustion that usually lined his features. "I've landed a gig," he said, his enthusiasm palpable. "And it's not just any gig, it's huge. I'm going to shoot Sophia Gray, the biggest Instagram model on the planet." Aubrey raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. "Sophia Gray? Should I have heard of her?" "Absolutely," Memphis replied as he made his way to the kitchen, a small space full of character, with countertops made from worn cypress wood. Their grain told stories of the bayou. Splashes of color brightened the room, glossy blue subway tiles along the backsplash green lace Aubrey had wrapped around the kitchen island and the mismatched red and yellow cupboards she'd depainted last winter when the rain-wounded tea let up. There was a bounce in Memphis's step as he continued. "She's a giant in the influencer world. Millions of followers, endless sponsorship deals, you name it. They've booked me for an 8-week shoot in LA. It's a solid payday." A wave of relief swept through Aubrey. Perhaps this was the break they had been desperately hoping for. "That's fantastic." "Really? So, when do you leave?" "They want me on a flight tomorrow night," he replied. The speed of the arrangement hinted at the urgency of the gig. "Wow, that's so soon," Aubrey murmured, her voice a mixture of surprise and concealed concern. "Yeah," he said, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. "I thought we could go out tomorrow night, have a nice dinner to celebrate, and then you could drop me off at the airport." "I'd love that," she said, warmth blooming in her chest despite the undercurrent of her worries. "Chicken and waffles for you and waffles for me, sound good?" "You read my mind," Memphis said, his enthusiasm undimmed. Their laughter filled the apartment and momentarily eased the underlying tension. They spent the evening planning, their conversation was light and hopeful. However, as the night deepened and Memphis' steady breathing signaled his descent into sleep, Aubrey found herself wide awake beside him. The darkness of their bedroom seemed to echo her swirling thoughts. Despite Memphis finding his stride, she couldn't shake the nagging pressure that clawed at her own creativity. What was her breakthrough? Where was her defining moment? The urge to create something meaningful, something marketable, pestered her relentlessly. Memphis had discovered his groove, but Aubrey was still searching for hers. Her canvas remained as blank as the night sky outside their window. The sharp blare of the morning alarm jolted Aubrey from her restless slumber. She quickly fumbled to silence it, her movements swift and quiet, as she hoped she didn't disturb Memphis. He needed his rest before the long journey that awaited him. Once the quiet settled back in, Aubrey slipped out of bed, the early morning chill wrapped around her as she made her way across the room. In the solitude of the kitchen, she brewed a strong cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air and nudging her further into wakefulness. Cup in hand, she moved to her spot by the window, a sanctuary of sorts, where the daunting presence of the blank canvas awaited her. Its stark whiteness mocked her, a reminder of the night's fruitless pursuit of inspiration. Today, she decided, there would be no hesitation. With a determined grasp, Aubrey picked up a wide brush and plunged it into a pot of crimson paint. The color of passion and fury. Without a second thought, she hurled bold, chaotic strokes across the canvas. The vibrant red spread like wildfire, unrestrained and fierce, a mirror of her inner tumult and steadfast resolve. As she immersed herself in her work, the sound of footsteps interrupted the silence. Memphis appeared next to her, his presence gentle yet curious. "Making any headway?" he asked, his tone light but filled with genuine interest. "I'm starting with red," Aubrey replied, almost out of breath from her exertions. The color spoke of her raw emotions and her passionate heart. "We'll see where it takes me." "Red it is," Memphis replied, as he appreciated her fiery start. "I'm going to pack for the trip and then maybe grab a real coffee." "Want one?" "I'm good with this cup, but thanks," she replied, her eyes not leaving the canvas that now began to tell a story. Memphis gave a nod of understanding and retreated down the hall, leaving Aubrey with her thoughts and her art. As she stood back, Aubrey observed the chaotic vibrancy of the red that dominated her canvas. It was just the beginning, she realized, a starting point to the journey she was on. The color pulsed with life and energy, and ignited a spark within her. If Memphis could carve out his path and find light in the maze of his career, then so could she. This canvas would no longer intimidate her, it would serve as a testament to her resilience and evolving creativity. Red was just the beginning, and she was ready to see where the journey would take her.